What do you all think some myths or stereotypes or assumptions are about people who are, homeless? Like, what do you think some of the different dialogues or narratives that people have kind of formed? Did you want to add to that? Are you thinking? Okay.
I'm thinking about this one.
Okay, yeah. I mean, because I know we always start with mental health, and mental health, of course, is part of it. And then some people aren't necessarily, they may acquire it, right, while they're going through this situation. But do you think there are any other type of stereotypes or misconceptions about people who are homeless?
Oh, most definitely. I think that we stigmatize homeless down to those that are in active substance use and that don't have any place to sleep. It's not just that. It's everyday people like you and me, living paycheck to paycheck, living in a hotel room, spending all their money just to sleep and eat. It's the single mom, single gentleman living in his van, person living in their camper, just trying to survive. Homelessness isn't what it's been stigmatized to be. All of us, majority of us, are one paycheck away. And so it could be your neighbor and you don't even know. So I think we've stigmatized homelessness to look like one dynamic a lot, and we need to expand that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think you're right. As well as there's this really easy, we'll look at, a jobs report from the state. So, well, there are 800,000 unfilled positions in the state of Michigan right now. But most of those jobs, they're not going to hire somebody without an address, without a resume, with that track record of not being able to show up for work.
Yeah.
And so we have all those positions, but we can't fill them with people who could be actively looking for work. But the misconception is, well, they don't want to work, or they don't want to take care of themselves, or they don't want to help themselves.
Right.
And those are the stereotypes that you have to fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think going back to what Tracy was saying, I think when it comes to, 18 to, I believe it's 36, that age range, a lot of those folks are a part of the hidden homelessness. Like Tracy was saying, folks who are living in their van, folks who are couch surfing. Mm-hmm. If you have experienced, a loss in your life and have had to move in with friends for a minute, you were part of the homelessness population at one point. And I think a lot of people tend to stigmatize that, but I think for myself, even, especially during COVID, being a college student during COVID, it was tough for a lot of my friends and I. It was really hard for us, and getting the resources that we needed on a college campus. But we also had a college campus that backed us up, and that was also really positive. But I think it opened up a lot of my friends and myself to the idea of how easy it is to slip into situations like that, how easy it is to be given an eviction notice on your door and not know what to do and where to turn, and let alone want to tell your parents that this is where you're at. So I think that there's a lot of stigmatization and a lot of myths around it. And I think that it's up to us as a community to really dig into why we think like that, and really be active in the conversations that we're having outside of rooms like this, and making sure that we ourselves are holding not only ourselves accountable and our communities accountable, but our elected officials accountable, and everyone up the chain.
Thank you. Were you trying to ask something, Trey? Okay.
I'm just agreeing over here.
Okay. Where do you all think the frustration about homelessness actually comes from? I think it's fear, economics, personal experiences. And the reason why I added personal experiences was I know I live in Midland, and I'm on the Housing Commission, and we were trying to advocate for a affordable housing unit there. And it literally is centered in a neighborhood where majority of people that live there are kind of like middle class or below they literally are making them. And that's why it was a school there called East Line, and it's no longer there. But for you to go to that school, most people had less money than more. And it was really interesting. We were at the meeting for it. Most of the people in that community who were a part of the, I hate saying lower class. I hate that, but I'm trying to say it, where they
working
didn't have.
Class?
What'd you say? Working class. We'll say that. And so they were much opposed to it. Right? It was this idea that, I went through it, I found my way, they need to find their way as well. So what do you think the fear is? Why do you think people have such pushback? I mean, like I said, I will personally say, when I visit some different communities, sometimes it is a lot, right? Walking through. I mean, people aren't always like, it's not like always friendly, right? Where you're walking through and people are like, oh, hi, it's not always like that, right? And I know people are angry, and so that's not a judgment, it's just a reality. And so what do you say to people? And I want to circle back to this question again, that have some, opposition to it. Some of it is valid, like Matthew said. So where do you think it comes from? Why do you think that? Yeah, go ahead, Mason.
Well, I think when you're struggling yourself, you're looking at the idea that, oh, this affordable housing development's coming into my neighborhood, that might, hurt my property value, right? And this is somebody who might fall into that demographic of people who is one paycheck away from being homeless themselves. So I think that there's this kind of tendency of like self-preservation that people have.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if it's everyone, and I think a lot of people, if you were to ask and you were to poll it, I think the majority of people would say no, like we need to come together as a community. I think that.
You think that you really?
I do. I think that I think that the people who are in opposition to those things can be louder sometimes, and they can control the dynamic. But I think that there's also things that you could be doing from a policy perspective, and part of this could be, and where that frustration might come from is if you were to, like in Bay City, we have housing commission houses scattered throughout.
Sure.
The idea was we're not going to economically segregate the city any further. And in areas where people might be wealthier, they have more time to be engaged. They have more time to advocate for themselves, and they can kind of lobby to make sure that those things aren't built in their neighborhoods. So you get a dynamic where the projects only get built in neighborhoods that are already worse off, and it worsens the economic disparity between those neighborhoods because people in the wealthier ones. So I think that's a policy decision, that from that standpoint, saying, hey, like we do need affordable housing here, but looking at it in a way that is holistic and beneficial long term, and looking at that sustainability piece is important too. So I think that could be where some of that problem kind of comes to the forefront. Yeah.
Sure. Anybody else want to add to that? Matthew?
There's certainly some validity there. When I think it's pretty common to see folks who have really struggled to get to a place of, I won't even say comfort, a place of stability, to then watch somebody who maybe was where they were be given what they think is a handout to get them to that same level of stability. Like, I had to work really hard, I had to sacrifice, I had to do all these things. Why is somebody else being given that?
Like student loans being absorbed.
Student loans being absorbed, and I think
that's the conversation.
They just, I had to work really hard and have this job to be able to buy this house. And you're going to give somebody a house. Well, why don't they have a job? So what are they going to do all day while I'm at work? Is my home at risk? Are my kids at risk? So I think there's all these questions because you just don't know. And there's unanswered things. And then there's resentment when you've had to work really hard and you feel like somebody isn't getting the same treatment or not working the same that you did. There's resentment. We see it. And it's not just at the below Alice level, right? We see this at the well above Alice level. Like, well, how did these new people, what did they do to be able to get into this nice part of town?
Yeah.
Like, I know what I do. I know how much I work or how much I make. Like, what job do they have? You see that at every level. So I don't think that is a restrictive to below Alice population.
Yeah. Thank you. Sue?
I'm just going to say, I think it's just admitting that we have a problem then. I mean, if we talking about affordable housing and homelessness, sometimes we like to hide things on, sweep it under the rug, thinking that we don't have that issue. And
like in a community?
In a community,
yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the city that we live in, it just, a lot of times it's just we don't want to admit it. And so if we talk about these kind of things, we're admitting that we have a problem, and then they have to figure, they may have a guilt, or they may have to figure out what's the next step. Or is it going to be a snowball effect? Now we have this. Now, we have to take care of this. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And I want to add to something you said, Mason, because like I said, I grew up in Cincinnati, and there were definitely areas where, and I want to make sure I say this correctly because I remember witnessing it, where certain demographics moved in and the neighborhood did change. right? Because there was no standard in that community, right? And I think so when it comes to community responsibility, I think that we also have to help each other to grow, right? Because if we just let things slide just because people are going through things, does this make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
And what they did was they enacted a program there, which was really cool, where they had mixed demographics moving
Yes.
in, right? Different
Yes.
classes, right? Moving in to one structure, and everybody helped everybody kind of stay kind of like, accountable and responsible, because it is important to go out and see, clean streets. That is important. That also is a part of quality of life. And and again, this isn't demeaning. I received government assistance at one point in my life. I became a single parent. I needed help, right? Where I had to get government help. So I'm not down to anybody, but I also think that we have to have some type of responsibility to each other. We have to have that, right? We have to have that and help people, educate people. People don't know, educate them, right? This is how you take care of yourself. This is how you do. I don't mind getting it for you, right? I don't mind getting this for you, but we can't just let people do it, because there's rules everywhere, right? So we help each other grow. That's what a community is about, in my opinion. When I used to work with children, I would teach them how to, especially young girls. They didn't know how to do things when they started their menstruals, right? So it's the idea that, okay, I'm going to teach you how to care for yourself, and it's okay for us to do that. So I go back to, the question of, where do you think the frustration is? And I think there is a fear that things will change in people's communities. And I think when we start to educate each other, not just with the resources, but also say, okay, this is how you better your life. This is how you can take care of yourself. I think we have a responsibility to do that, because it's really interesting when I watch people care for animals. I mean, people will turn over millions. Yes. I mean, for an animal. I mean, you look at, even online, if a dog is lost in a neighborhood, people go to hell and high water to make sure this dog is taken care of. But we watch each other, kind of struggle. And it's just so interesting when I watch that. So I regress, but yes.
No, can I jump in on that?
Yes,
so
please.
I think one of the things too, I think there's a terminology issue. We'll talk about this. So right now we're talking roads funding at the state level, right?
Sure.
So the House is talking about $3 billion in roads funding. The governor's office is talking about $3 billion in roads funding. We're speaking the same language. We have some different details, but because we're talking about the same number, that's a really good jumping off point. When I say affordable housing and you say affordable housing, we're probably not talking about the same thing at all. Mm-hmm. Because what I'm talking about is making sure that the people who work in our community can afford to live in our community. So my business is in Frankenmuth. Mm-hmm. Police, fire, teachers can't afford to live in town. Right? So when we're talking about affordable housing, we're trying to make sure that those folks can afford to live in that community. Mm-hmm. So to talk about having housing that's affordable for someone who is just transitioning from homelessness, that's not the same conversation. And so a lot of times we're all saying the same word, but it doesn't mean the same thing, which is a huge barrier to moving conversations forward.
That's such a great point.
I think the implementation of those things are a little bit different, but I do think that the overall conversation of affordable housing at a top level is kind of the same conversation, because I think that when people who can work in an area can afford to live there, then you can begin to work on everything else that it is encompassed in affordable housing. I think that that's just one step and one thing under the umbrella, but I do think that it's possible to talk about a $300 billion budget and have that encompass multiple different avenues when it comes to making sure that our communities are safer and everyone has a home and a foundation to build from.
Yeah. I hear both of you all, and I think it's really interesting, because I never really thought about it from that perspective. Even the language, we're all saying the same words, but it can, in people's perspective, look a little bit different. But yeah, I hear what you're saying as well. This is good, and this is good. I love it. I myself have had to have help. So and I think it's good for us to have these conversations, because a lot of times we talk very abstract, right? And it's just so grand and it's just kind of out in the sky. But I'm a how do we do it? I'm the action person. What do we do? How do we implement this? And how do we keep it? How do we make it sustainable? How do we empower people to help themselves? I truly believe in that. And I think that when you do that, you can truly make change, right? I want to ask one question, and then we're soon going to watch a short clip of a video, and then we'll go to audience questions and comments. So my last question for you all is, if we remove the labels of homeless, addict, aid recipient, do you think people will be more compassionate? I think that labels have restricted our compassion. I think that labels kind of gives you this thought about a person before you even meet them, right? And so do you think that if we remove that, do you think people will be more compassionate, or do you think it doesn't matter? Do you think? Go ahead. Yeah, go for it. No, go.
I mean, I've heard people use homelessness rather than saying homelessness, they're unhoused.
Sure.
And so I just wonder, like, if you give that verbiage rather than homelessness, the stigma maybe will go a little away. But I think people will have more compassion in that sense when you say, that person is unhoused rather than homelessness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think that because homelessness has just been so
Yeah,
stigmatized? Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Go
that
ahead, Izzy.
I definitely agree with you, Sue. I think that also a narrative shift in general needs to be had when it comes to the conversations that we're having and looking at these folks as our neighbors and former teachers, our aunts, our uncles. Like these are people that we know and that we love. And I think that that's something that we all have to remember. I think that almost everyone in this room probably knows someone that has suffered with homelessness, whether that's like direct, you can see it, or that's hidden homelessness. And so I think that even just being able to think about that will lead you to be more compassionate with yourself and with others and with our overall community.
Thank you. Anybody else with that? Matthew?
I'm not sure if I agree that changing the terminology is going to change it. I think but the narrative does need to change. It's who's homeless, right? Because there's this definite image of what homelessness is, and
Yes.
it's the person, with a bag on the street corner panhandling.
Right.
And it's not the college kid who hasn't been able to find a job. Mom and dad said you can't move back in, and you're bouncing from grandma's to uncle's to friend's couch. And I think it's talking more about that and the opportunities that will allow those folks to find housing
Yeah.
will change the narrative.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to be talked about a lot more than it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Anybody else want to add to that?
I do.
Yeah, go for it.
So I didn't really, before I became a homeless advocate, before I was down in Ingham, I never really held a negative opinion towards people. I guess I was a little disconnected and I didn't understand it.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
until you find yourself in a situation, and it can be like literally a house fire. I had helped a family who lost everything in a house fire, and they had 3 days with Red Cross in a hotel, and then they had CPS at the hotel the day they were going out onto the street because they had no plan, they had no family, they had nowhere to go. And so until you find yourself in that situation, you might stereotype other people, and then you're looking at yourself. And so now when I approach it, I look at anybody that I help that's unhoused or homeless as myself.
But
Because
you went through it.
I did, but
And- yeah.
I also realized too, going through it after finding myself in it, how much of the hidden homelessness I did not notice. And we talked about this. I went to the grocery store after work to get food like everybody does, something for dinner. And I walked past cars, and if I glanced in and saw a family sitting in there, or a person or two people, I assumed that they had somebody in the store, or they were getting ready to go in the store or leaving the store. I didn't realize until I was in that situation how many people were living in store parking lots in their car, assimilating.
Yeah, it's true. It's true, and we did talk, and I enjoyed our conversation. It's really interesting, and I appreciate the point that you made about once you went through it, and I think that happens to most of us, right? I mean, some people are kind of naturally empathetic and compassionate, but most people are not, and until they walk in that shoe, right? They don't understand it, and it's fair and it's okay for us to say we don't understand it, but ask the questions, right? Maybe become more informed, and I think we have a responsibility to become informed as citizens as well to ask those questions.